Coming off of the 2023-2024 NHL season, it's hard to argue Connor McDavid isn't the best player in the world. But what makes him the best player in the world?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. My name is Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers the first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and by our friends at FanDuel, make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster of bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, today's episode naturally came out of a conversation I was having over the weekend. I was talking with a few of my friends. We went out on Saturday night, and one of them had brought up, because America won the gold medal in basketball and trying to, who's the best player in the world right now? Is it Jokic? Is it Giannis? Could you argue LeBron? Who else is in? Is Luka? And we naturally pivoted the conversation to hockey. And I was very adamant that as much as you might think McKinnon or Austin Matthews is close to McDavid, and they're in the ballpark, it's not an insane opinion to say they're pretty close talent-wise. I do think it's pretty much unanimous at this point, especially coming off the season. We just saw the 100 assists, winning the Conn Smythe on the losing team in the Stanley Cup final. So we're going to start out, first segment, we're just going to talk about the stats. The stats are the foundational principles of our argument that we build our argument out from there. When you look at the stats, since McDavid entered the league, very clearly the best player in the world. Then you go a tier deeper, you look at some of the traits, some of the skill sets that McDavid features in his game that enable him to score so many points, and we can start to get a more detailed understanding of his game. We're going to talk about some stuff using the NHL Edge tool, which does player tracking stuff. So we'll talk about speed, we'll talk about positioning, we'll talk about some transition play, about gaining the offensive zone with possession of the puck, creating chances off of the rush, that type of stuff. And then we'll wrap up with what the holes are in McDavid's game, if there are any meaningful ways to approach trying to plug those holes, or if it's kind of a moot point because the game that he does play is already so dominant. So let's start at the outset. You started hearing about Connor McDavid as a 15-year-old. If you're relatively plugged into the hockey world, you remember him getting the exceptional status in the OHL to go a year early. You remember seeing the highlights. You remember hearing the name. And the entire hockey world went into that season, the season that he was draft eligible to be the first overall pick, the 14-15 season. The Leafs, the Sabres, the Oilers, quite a few teams all hitched their wagons to this idea of the savior, that Connor McDavid, whatever team added Connor McDavid was getting a franchise-altering player. They were talking about him in junior the same way Sidney Crosby was talked about when he was in junior, a decade, 11 years before. So at the outset, you're talking about a very talented player. Of course, his rookie season injury, he breaks his collarbone very early on in the season, misses, I want to say, almost half the season, plays something in the ballpark of 50 games. Artemi Panarin, who's 24 years old at this point, wins the Calder because that was Panarin's first season in the NHL as a Blackhawk after coming over from Russia. And then very quickly, you start to get an understanding of just how good McDavid is. And the counting stats we use when we talk about goals and assists to get to points, these are not perfect statistics. I do want to emphasize that these are only part of the conversation, part of building out your argument. You should use counting stats as part of a larger conversation. When you are trying to build out a case, counting stats are not the best measure of comparing player A versus player B. They are one component of an argument. They are the most translatable statistic. Everybody who watches hockey understands a goal and assist. The problem with goals and assists as a means of comparing players is that they're not all created equal. The empty net goal that comes at the end of the game when the other team pulls the goalie, that counts the same in the goal category, or if you pass to set that up as the assist, as an actual outplay goal. And then power play goals and power play assists, they're a little bit easier to come by than 5-on-5 goals. So I do think it's important I lay that out because I try not to just use counting stats. I try not to just use advanced analytics. I try not to just use transition stats. I really do try to encompass a wide swath of data to form a more detailed opinion. Like I'm working on a project right now ranking the top 100 players in the NHL, and I'm not even halfway done through the planning and the research stage because I'm going multiple publications, their rankings, some proprietary statistics on a few different analytics websites, my own personal rankings, and then I'm going to take the average of all of those. And that will be how I put together my final rankings because I want to do the most thorough job I possibly can. And that includes interacting with and engaging with opinions I might not agree with and finding, well, if they have this guy ranked 32nd and I have him ranked 84th, why is there such a disparity? What are they valuing? Is it a young guy that they think is going to keep getting better? Or is it an old guy who might be in decline? So that's part of the conversation as well. So since being drafted, Connor McDavid has recorded 982 points in 645 games. That is 1.5 points per game for his career. The next closest player is Nikita Kucherov, who has 855 points in 673 games, which is 1.27 points per game. You should also note Kucherov doesn't come over until he's a little bit later in his development cycle because he spends a few years in Russia. It's why he was a mid-round pick as opposed to a first or a second-round pick. And because of that, he comes over a little more polished, a little more developed, and he's also already a little bit older. So the other thing you can use here, and people do use this as a knock against Leon Draisaitl, but we're going to use it to put a feather in McDavid's cap right now. Draisaitl's third when we talk about the players after, when we talk about points since 2015-16, the first year McDavid was in the league, Draisaitl's third. McDavid and Draisaitl have connected on a lot of each other's points over the years, and that has been used occasionally as a knock against one or the other. But I think it should show you that when you put two extremely high-level players together, they're going to be able to do something genuinely special. And that's the case here. You don't see another player this close to his teammate in point production if there's not something extraordinary, if there's not something unique going on. Especially now, and something that we'll talk about later on, maybe in the week, the idea that maybe the Oilers are going to try and distribute their minutes a little more evenly so that McDavid and Draisaitl are a little bit fresher come playoff time. It's not the worst idea in the world, and that might cause a dip in counting stats production because if they play less minutes, fewer opportunities to score, fewer opportunities likely translates to fewer goals. So that is something to consider as well when we're talking about evaluating a player's game. You got to think about the fact that if a guy plays on the third line and he's on power play 2, he's not going to have as much minutes as the first line right wing who gets power play 1 time. So that's part of why we use context when we cite statistics. We don't just throw the statistic at you. We use level 1. Now we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go to level 2 of that. We're going to go to, well, we know he's got this many goals and this many assists. Now we're going to go to how does he go about generating them? So when we come back on this episode of Locked On Oilers, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs and the Olympics over, we have fewer games, and the sports are not sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. If you were curious, the Oilers are still checking in as the betting favorite to take home the Stanley Cup next season at 8.5 to 1. If you think the Florida Panthers are going to go back-to-back, you can get them at 10 to 1. You can get the New Jersey Devils, Colorado Avalanche, and Dallas Stars at 11 to 1 each. The Vegas Golden Knights and Carolina Hurricanes are both at 14 to 1. The Leafs and the Rangers at 15 to 1. If you like New Look Nashville with Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, 16 to 1. And if you want a long shot, the one I've been touting all summer, the Vancouver Canucks at 23 to 1 to take home Lord Stanley's Cup for the first time in their franchise's history. So if you want to get in on the action, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, building out our profile, building out our understanding of Connor McDavid a little bit more, I don't think it's a shock for me to tell you that his most defining trait, his most valuable, his most important trait is his skating. We all know that when Connor has the puck on his stick, it looks different. We all know that when he builds up a head of speed, no matter how many defenders are in front of him, it looks different. Nathan MacKinnon can kind of do it. Jack Hughes, Matt Barzal, they can kind of do it. But when Connor builds up that head of speed, he still has the maneuverability where he's skating at top speed to be able to weave through traffic, to be able to get to the net. And the thing that's so dangerous offensively about the way McDavid plays is the fact that he draws so much attention when he has the puck that you're naturally going to be able to juice other people's statistics. You look at the season Zach Hyman had last year, and we did an episode earlier in the summer where we said an average Zach Hyman season based on what he typically does is around 25, 30 goals. To explode for 54, that tells you the environment was favorable, that something the Oilers did was going to be more conducive to offense for Zach Hyman. In this case, it was riding shotgun with Connor McDavid. It was getting the net front spot on the power play. And it was really refining what he needed to do down to a singular trait. You know, this is something that good teams have always done historically, that if you're not a specialist, but if you're really good at one thing, we're going to put you in a position where that's all you need to do. The examples I always go back to are the Patriot teams in the NFL of the last decade. You look at guys like Chris Long or Rob Ninkovich or Brandon Browner or any number of the rotational guys, whether it's the second corner or a pass rusher, that's all you do. So we're going to get you out there on the field in third and passing situations, and all you're going to do is go after the quarterback. We're not having you in there on early downs. We're not worried about stopping the run. You are solely on this team because you're a good pass rusher. And when we get to those obvious situations, I want you to go out there and get it. In this case, Zach Hyman's equivalent of being a good pass rusher was getting to the net front and using his finishing talent. Zach Hyman's got an above average NHL shot. And if he can consistently get to the same spot over and over and over again, because defenses have to respect the way McDavid plays, it's only natural that he's going to have a commensurate boost in statistical production. So when you look under the hood, the speed speaks for itself. And these are all from the NHL Edge website. He's the 99th percentile of top skating speed. He's the 99th percentile of speed bursts over 20 miles an hour. He's the 95th percentile of high danger scoring chances. And he's in the 99th percentile of offensive zone time for a forward. So all of that in conjunction, all of that combined tells you that this is a player who is using their speed to break the game. Not just control, to break the game. 99th percentile offensive zone time. So percentiles, the way they work. So for example, let's say you lined up a room of guys by height and you took all their heights and you put it out on a scatter plot, and every point on the plot got placed along a horizon. You know, when we're talking about distributions, it's one dimension. It's not up and down, left. It's straight across. 99th percentile is all the way over here, close to 1. You know, very, very rare. 99th percentile would be like somebody who's 7'4". The first percentile, if you went all the way the other direction, would be somebody who's like 4'6". The average male height in the United States, I believe, is 5'8" or 5'9" rather. And if that, be dead in the middle. So you're talking 2 standard distributions away from average. So if we were to use our height analogy here, Connor McDavid being 99th percentile of skater would be like being 7'4" as a person in terms of height. That's how rare and how uncommon it is for someone to be 99th percentile. That by definition, when you are that good at something, there are few of you. That there are not a lot of people in that grouping, and that's what makes the distribution take the shape it does. Because a normal distribution, it goes straight across into a gradual increase till you get to the exact mean average, and then it starts to decline, and then it gets back out, and it's all the way back over here down towards 1. I'll throw a standard distribution on in post-production so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking abstractly, but when you think about it, somebody who is this good of a skater and dominant on the puck, there are plenty of splash skaters. Everybody remembers Michael Grabner or Lucas Raymond, the Carl Hagelin, the straight line burners. Those guys were really fast, but they did not have puck skills the way Connor McDavid has puck skills. And they didn't have the edge work. Those guys were really fast in a straight line, but Connor can bob and weave. Connor can make any situation a favorable matchup because if he draws people towards him, he's going to open up more space for everybody. And it's funny that we don't talk about it in the same way that we do basketball, but that's the principle here. When you're talking about a player who is one of one when it comes to speed, he's going to draw guys towards him. And that's going to naturally lead to open opportunities for other players. You think about the drive and kick phenomenon in basketball right now, where a good basketball player is being coached to drive to the basket, to draw defenders to him, to kick the ball back out to hit a 3, because a 3 is worth more points than a 2. And they hit those threes at a higher conversion rate than teams do on that contested layup. So mathematically, it makes more sense to just dish it out and go for the corner 3 that goes in, 44, 45% of the time, as opposed to the contested 2, which is 37, 38% of the time. Because if you take those percentages over the course of an entire game, more 3s are going to go in. You're going to score more points than you would if you were to take contested 2s. And one last thing on McDavid before we move along to the next segment. The aspect of McDavid's game that I think we should highlight more is his transition play. He is the engine of the Oilers' transition play. He comes back in the defensive zone. He will take a regroup and he will go. And when you gain the offensive zone with possession of the puck and with speed, that is going to naturally lead to more offense than if you had to dump and chase. Think about it. You just did all of that work in the defensive zone to recover the puck. You worked all the way up from your defensive zone through the neutral zone into the offensive zone, and then just to dump it and lose possession again after doing all of that work. It's difficult. It's really hard, and it's not a particularly conducive way to score often. And it takes real team discipline to make that dump and chase game work to the degree you need it. And there are tangents off of that where you can be a strong rush team that likes to cycle. Think of the Panthers, who gain the zone with speed, get a shot on goal, work the cycle, and begin to break the other team down defensively. That does work, but the Oilers' skill sets, it's not off of the cycle. It is more off of the rush. And rush chances, statistically, are more dangerous because you're able to put more pressure on the defense and get to more dangerous areas of the ice, which in turn leads to more offense. So we're going to take one more quick break. We're going to talk about McDavid's defense, how that probably is the one weak point of his game, and why it doesn't really matter. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Thank you to everybody who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers in the dog days of summer. It's August 12th. It's actually my sister's birthday, and it's hard right now. There is nothing going on in the hockey world. We're still a good 4 or 5 weeks away from training camps. The Oilers still have roster decisions to make. They need to figure out if it's going to be Evander Kane LTIR, if they're going to trade Cody Ceci, if they're going to trade Brett Kulak, if they're going to pull a move out of left field that we're not thinking about. They need to figure out a Draisaitl extension. There are still a lot of decisions that need to be made regarding the Oilers summer, and I will be sure to cover them whenever they do end up happening, even if it's not until closer to training camp, whatever. So you've heard me talk a lot on the show since I took over at the end of April that in today's NHL, the best defense is to not play defense at all. that the more defense you play, the more likely it is you're going to concede a goal against, and the more difficult it is to have success. Because the more defense you play, that means the fewer offensive opportunities you're going to need to have. And in today's game, playing as little defense as possible is the most advantageous. And this might change, as we go further into the future, as the game continues to evolve and change shapes. Maybe we have that true positionless hockey where the defensemen can cycle in for the forwards and the forwards are comfortable enough skating backwards that they can cover in for the defensemen. And this will change. And maybe there is a way for the NHL to skew back towards defense and goaltending as a viable method to be be a contender consistently, as opposed to what we're seeing now, where if you don't have the high-powered offense, if you don't have 3, 4, 5 point per game players, you're not a serious Stanley Cup contender. And you can point to a lot of the teams that have come up short over the last handful of years failing to meet that threshold, whether it's Carolina, whether it's the Rangers, whether it's the Dallas Stars, whether it's, if you want to use the Maple Leafs, for example, you want those 4 point per game forwards. You want a goalie who's at least league average and can flirt with being good. They don't need to be great. Adin Hill is not great. Adin Hill is fine and has occasionally flashed good. Darcy Kemper was good and then flashed great for a little bit when the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup a couple years ago. But at this point, the best way to be effective in today's game is to not play as much defense, to play as little defense as possible. We've talked about that a lot this summer in regards to Darnell Nurse, in regards to Cody Ceci. And the same thing is true here, because if you look at Connor McDavid's underlying defensive numbers, they're not great. Teams definitely can find ways to score when he's out there. And when he's out there with Zach Hyman and Evander Kane or Warren Fogle or whomsoever you want to put on that other wing, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, whatever, that group is not out there for defense. And the reason you are willing to overlook McDavid's perceived defensive shortcomings, and you should, and I'm telling you, you should, is because the offense is so good it cancels it out. There are star players who are very bad defensively whose offense does not cancel out their defensive problems. You can look at Jeff Skinner in Buffalo, for example. You can look at what Taylor Hall was doing with the Devils for a couple of years, where you can be an amazing offensive player. You can flirt with the Hart Trophy. In Taylor Hall's case, you can win the Hart Trophy. But if you're not great defensively, you can give it back. Look at what Erik Karlsson did when he won the Norris. Erik Karlsson was not the best all-around defenseman in hockey 2 years ago. He won the Norris because he put up 120-something points as a defenseman. That's great. It's great. Not good defensively, though. Defense matters until it doesn't. If you create enough offense, I don't care. You look at Nikita Kucherov's defensive numbers. You look at Leon Draisaitl's defensive numbers. You look at Artemi Panarin's defensive numbers. I don't care. Their offense is at a high enough level that it doesn't matter that they're bad defensively. It cancels out. If I had 2 cups of water and they were exactly even, that would be if they were totally net even or positive offense defense. If you poured more water in one cup and that was your offense cup, the defense would still be at the same level, but the offense, it fills in that space. So that's the way you should think about it as far as McDavid. Yeah, you would like him to be on the ice for fewer scoring chances against, but I do think some of that is tied to the way he tries to create offense, because the Oilers are typically off the rush. Rush offense typically only produces 1 or 2 scoring chances per zone entry. That in turn allows the other team to counter going back the other way. You think about where McDavid is on the ice. A lot of the time he's behind the net front. He's in front of the net. He's on the flanks. He's close to the net. That means he's got to go back further on defense. And this is going to drive some people crazy when I say this, but if McDavid doesn't want to burn himself out defensively and wants to get a second rush to go back on offense, I'm not really that upset if he's not coming back full burn on defense to back check. That offense is more valuable than his defense. You would like him to be better defensively. It's not a hot take to say Austin Matthews is better defensively. He is. Nathan McKinnon is probably better defensively. Sidney Crosby is probably better defensively. Sasha Barkov is probably better defensively. But McDavid's offense is all better than their offense. And it is all so much better than their offense. you can't really find an argument to poke a hole in this. McKinnon won the Hart Trophy for MVP. That's great. Regular season, very different. You watched the McDavid who came out of the gate a little bit slow back in November. He was dealing with that injury. Didn't look right for a few weeks. Missed, I want to say, about 2.5 weeks worth of games at the beginning of the season last year. He came back. It took a few games to get up to speed. And then he had 100 assists. And he got a line mate a 50-goal season. And yeah, McDavid probably gets closer to 40 goals next year, and the assist numbers probably come down. That's fine. We talked about this a few weeks ago when we were talking about goal distribution. It all evens out because when you were talking about this high caliber of a player, it is not really a concern. A mortal NHL player at 28, you would say, okay, there might be signs of decline. Not this guy. McDavid would be fine. McDavid should continue to put up 120, 130 point seasons for at least the next 4 or 5 years. Easy. Easy. Look at what Sidney Crosby's doing right now at 36, 37 years old on an actively bad Penguins team. Even if the Oilers stink going forward, which they won't, McDavid's still going to put up 130, 140 points a season. Don't worry about it. If the team is bad, he's going to put up more offense because they're going to be chasing the game more. So that's the parting thought I'll leave you with. Yeah, other guys might have aspects of their game that are better, and they're close offensively. McDavid is far and away the best player in the world. And in today's game, his skill set is perfect. The high-end puck distributor that's also got a decent shot and is the fastest player in the game. All of that married together in this state where it's faster and smaller than ever is a dominant combination that makes him the best player in the world. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now, go check out the Locked On NHL podcast where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you were watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. Leave me a comment. Do you think anyone is particularly close to Connor McDavid for the best player in the world conversation? I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.